to the second episode. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Ask Yaritza. I am so excited to be here. If you tuned in last week, then you noticed we discussed what is CRT, why is it important, and today we leveled it up a bit. We're answering two of your famous questions, and I brought my homegirl, my friend, Tinisha Shaw.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Tinisha Shaw. I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina. Social teacher, SEL specialist now. And I'm so glad to be here with Yaritza. She is the best. And looking forward to answering your questions.
So what's so funny is, and we were just discussing this backstage, I met Tanisha off of Twitter. We were on a panel discussion together discussing race, equity, curriculum. So this ties in right with today. We have two of your questions that were asked from some educators, actually one in a different country and one in a different state. Keep asking us the questions on Twitter. Don't forget, every Friday we'll post to the blog with several activities. So I actually wanted to jump right in to the questions because like today is juicy, juicy, juicy. So the first question, literally, what suggestions do you have for incorporating CRT in a high school L classroom? This question hit home for me because I actually was an L student. Um, my mom, I believe, filled out the application a little bit incorrect, especially that language part. You know how they say, what's your first language? And she put Spanish. And then from the time I was in elementary to the time I was in high school, I was in the L classroom, but we called it native, which meant everyone in the classroom only spoke Spanish. So I was in there with, people who spoke Spanish in different dialects. But the one thing that was different was our culture, which ties in with culturally responsive teaching. So I actually wanted to ask Tanisha, do you have any suggestions with how to incorporate CRT in a high school L classroom?
Yes, I think with this question is so interesting because a lot of times teachers think about culture responsive teaching on that surface level. I just think back to Zaretta Hammond's book and where she talks about the different levels of culture. And so when you think about it as, all of these surface levels, of course, it's going to be very, very difficult to talk about different cultures and different ways of people being, language, how their dialects, their food, their expressions. And so if you have multiple cultures in your classroom, of course, you're going to be like, how can I do this? But here's what you have to do. You have to go deeper. And that's where I'm about to plug myself, the SEL comes in, right? Where you start having conversations and allowing students to express their self-awareness, their social awareness. And then you start really getting into the deeper levels. And that's where you can really start incorporating that, because then you'll notice that there's connections. And then students can really tap into the literature that you put in front of them, where they see themselves and they reflect themselves, but they're really having these conversations on a deeper level because you're listening to who they are, their values, their belief systems. That's where the deeper level cultural responsive teaching comes into it. So that's building relationships, using some SEL, and doing some self-reflection on yourself, checking your biases.
And I'm so happy that Tanisha talked on building relationships. You guys know I am always stating that as the first fact. You have to build relationships. And even going back to my L classroom, I had a teacher by the name of Senora Gaetan, and she only spoke to us in Spanish. And she was supposed to be teaching us English, but what it did was it reminded me of my culture, and it reminded me of embracing who I was, because that was almost like my second home. So it was like, all right, I know third period every day I have to speak Spanish as opposed to just speaking Spanish at home. So what I will also say is, if you're going to incorporate CRT into the classroom with L's, allow them to be themselves. I created an assignment today called My Culture Equals My Identity, because the one thing that we forget about L's, or students who, whose English language is second, is that they're human, right? And they want to feel at home. They want you to embrace who they are. So sometimes allowing them to use their preferred language, giving them that choice. And, the second part of that question was even, how do we incorporate the United States culture? If we think about the culture in the United States, I've mentioned this before, it's a melting pot. It's a melting pot. It's not just one culture, it's not just one way of life. And so we have to embrace everything that comes with the United States being technically the United States, which is not even founded by the Europeans, right? So
Mhm.
we have to acknowledge the differences that exist. And that's the only way that we can truly build culture. So thank you so much, Tanisha. And from Twitter, I've noticed today I talked about To Kill a Mockingbird. And I know that was a question that a lot of folks, an activity that a lot of folks were just surprised about. But this stemmed from a question. The question was, every year I read To Kill a Mockingbird with my new class. Is there a way to tie systematic injustices that were occurring with those that are occurring today? So I'll touch on it a bit. And then, of course, I'll let Tanisha touch on it. So what I would say is To Kill a Mockingbird is it's controversial. And for two reasons. One is because we know that it looks at race through one lens, which is from a white perspective. And then the next I would say is some teachers don't really have a say in what they teach, right? So even though we're breaking down barriers, the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that barriers still exist across the United States, through the Atlantic Ocean, through the Pacific Ocean. They exist every single where. And so when we look at To Kill a Mockingbird, and I believe W.B.E. Du Bois said it first, we have to think about the double consciousness, right? Constantly reminding people of their trauma, but also it's almost like you have Black students looking at themselves through your lens. So I
Mhm.
would say that is that you have a choice on how you should teach To Kill a Mockingbird. Things are happening today, right? There's so many things happening with culture and race and injustices that not only in To Kill a Mockingbird. Look at the Hunger Games, the Mockingjay. To me, when I see
So I think that we had a little bit of a glitch, but I know that Yaritza was talking about some of her great lessons that she tries to incorporate, but how different ways that we can teach To Kill a Mockingbird. One of the things that I always, if you have to teach To Kill a Mockingbird, teach it in a critical way. Don't teach it from that one lens. Have students to really evaluate what they are reading, to bring in different perspectives that are not heard. What voices are not being heard? Let's talk about the justice system. And so it allows them to read this text, but also bring it back to what is relevant in their community, which is so key and so important. But here's my soapbox, and I know Yaritza and I have talked about this. If you don't always have to teach it. Yaritza, are you back? I'm sorry.
I'm back. No, I think it was me. I think it was me. This is that Brooklyn connection. You see what happened when you live smack dead in the middle of Brooklyn?
Listen, I was like, this, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. But I'm so glad you're back. But now let's talk about teaching. If you have to teach To Kill a Mockingbird, to teach it in a critical way, right? Not to allow the students just read it verbatim, but to have some insight, to break it down and think about the different voices that are not being heard. But then my other response is, if you don't have to teach it, or you're teaching based on standards, find something else. I want people to stop teaching it. Like, don't teach it anymore. Like, stop. There's so many other texts that you can use that teaches the civil rights and teaches about Black people with their own agency, with their own power, with their voice, and not having to gain their voice through the voices of the white gaze. Like, I just think about when I was growing up, Mildred Taylor, all of her books, right? That's Roll of Thunder, Hear My Call. Like, there were so many different perspectives from that same period of time that you can really tap into. Jacqueline Woodson, like, research and find different texts that tells the stories, not just of African Americans here in the country, but think about the internment of Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans. There's so many different texts that you can use to do better. So I think another glitch. But this has been an awesome conversation. I'm so excited about having this conversation and asking these questions.
Oh no. Okay. Hey everyone. And Tanisha, I just want to thank you so much. It looks like Yaritza's connection is going in and out, and so we'll see if she joins back. But I just want to thank you so much, Tanisha, for jumping in today, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Of course, stay on the lookout. There will be as Yaritza started talking about, there are already some resources that she has built in conjunction with Tanisha to address these two questions, and we'll have the blog post on Friday. And keep sharing your questions with that hashtag Ask Yaritza on Twitter. And here's Yaritza to share more. But Yaritza, I've been covering. I said check out the blog post on Friday. Ask your questions on Twitter. Thank you so much. What else?
I took this as, I don't believe that the man above wanted me to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird. I see this as a sign of, Yaritza, you're about to say something that you probably shouldn't say. No, but I would say Tanisha said it all. I'm also a firm believer that if you have a choice, do not teach To Kill a Mockingbird, because it's from the perspective of only one person. And if we think about history in America, it's always from that same perspective. And so if we're going to try to challenge African Americans and Latinos and people of color and indigenous people, then we have to start with the reality, with being authentic, with being transparent and saying, yes, this happened, but also your people were brilliant and your people discovered things and they made things and they empowered each other. So I wouldn't even say, like Tanisha said, there's so much text out there that, discusses the African American plight, but also the successes of African Americans. And so I would say dig deep into that, but also current events. We are living in a time right now of upheaval. We are living in it. And so allow your students to debate, allow your students to question, to argue. I tell people all the time, the presidential candidate activity that I had kids do, it was because I needed them to understand that you just don't vote for one person because you don't believe in what the other person is saying, or you don't want to see them because they look different than how you look. You have to learn about the facts, and then you have to look at how each argues the issues. And so even today, I laugh even about that, and how my students were just like, Trump gets a 1 because in the debate, he did not take anything serious. And I was just like, this is what life's about. It's about trying to figure out what your opinion is and not what the media tells you it is. So thank you so much, Tanisha, for today. I know me and my Brooklyn Wi-Fi.
Made it work.
And I would say, guys, please keep giving us your questions. If you don't think anyone's looking at them, we are always looking at them. I am always trying to find innovative ways to create activities for you guys. The activities discussed today are already in the Discovery Library. This was a show.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.